Okay, it's just past 7, so we'll get started. I'm sure, or I'm not sure, but perhaps some more people will be trickling in. But my name is Mike Hebler. I'm in the Center for Social Concerns with Felicia Johnson O'Brien, and both of us spend a good deal of time meeting with students who are discerning life after graduation, particularly those who are thinking about what we refer to as postgrad service, so any number of the full-time service programs that are out there. And so please know that we are a resource. Felicia, do you want to say hello and anything to add?
Hello, yeah, I'm a product of postgraduate service. Spent some time in Honduras and now, well, eventually got my master's in social work, but now work at the CSC and assist with the summer service learning program. Yeah, but it's great to see you all and look forward to our conversation.
And I should also mention that I served in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps 17 years ago. So, but really grateful for Clara and Christian and Becca to be with us tonight as our panelists. Each former volunteers, Clara and Christian Notre Dame grads just a year or two ago, and Becca, who's a Notre Dame employee. I thought we might just do basically surrounds of questions that I prepared that I'll ask, but then we will open it up to the audience for any and all questions, and we will wrap up no later than 8 p.m. So maybe I'll just ask our three panelists to just do a brief word of introduction. Where are you zooming in from? Where did you serve? What was the capacity in which you were serving? And then we'll move into some of the more detailed questions for those discerning students out there. And maybe we'll just go Clara, Christian, Becca, if that works.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Clara. I graduated 2020. I'm a proud PE Pyro. I am currently in Sioux City, Iowa at my parents' house. Just bought a home with my husband, so moving out soon. We took down wallpaper today. And I served in Chicago at Mercy Works, which is the service year part of Mercy Home, a boys and girls home in Chicago. It was an AmeriCorps program, so that's how I was funded, which was great. So I got that stipend afterwards, or the award after. And I worked in the aftercare program, so I worked with former residents and did like social work case management with them.
Hey everyone, like Michael said, my name's Christian. I'm in Philadelphia right now. I am currently a second-year medical student. I'm over up at Penn, and 2018 graduate from Duncan Hall. And so my year of service was with Secours Volunteer Ministry. It's a smaller program. It's a year long, and it's affiliated with the Secours hospital system. And so I worked in West Baltimore in a hospital that actually no longer exists, but they do have other sites still. And so my role was, they called it like a patient advocate. And so essentially what I would do is go around on the inpatient unit there and talk with patients and kind of just be like a listening presence for them and kind of hear, their concerns, their questions, things like that. And yeah, spent a year in community living in West Baltimore, and it was a really great time. So I'm excited to talk more about it.
Hi everyone, I'm Becca Mendez. I am calling from South Bend. I, like Mike said, work at Notre Dame. And my service was in the Peace Corps. I was an environmental conservation volunteer in Paraguay. And I'm now Associate Director for the Master of Global Affairs over at the Keough School. And it's really nice to get to meet you all. And thanks for the opportunity to be able to kind of reflect on this stuff. So I'm happy to, engage with you. And if any of you want to have follow-up conversations about Peace Corps, I'm happy to connect on that.
Thank you. So maybe we'll kick it off with reflections on your senior year in college, each of you, thinking about what's next, how to navigate this really big question, scary question sometimes. What do you recall that was helpful as you were exploring opportunities, having conversations, discerning this question of service, not service, or service, but which programs? What comes to mind that you think could be helpful to name for our students here tonight? And we can just keep the same order going.
I feel like I said 2020, graduated 2018. I don't know. 2020's been crazy. So 2018 graduate a couple years ago. Senior year was hectic, as all of you are feeling, and it's even crazier because it's 2020. So I really feel for all of you. I distinctly remember being in Mike's office, and I had already come to the service, wanted to do a service year, and then was like, how do I choose though? I have these couple great options. Like, how do I decide this? So I remember sitting in Mike's office, and it was very helpful and was tear-filled, as most of my, thought processes about this were. But what it came down to for me was, what did I want, like, as my launching point? Because Notre Dame is a great launching point, but then, like, I knew the service year would only be 1 year long. So I was figuring out, like, what were the things I would need from it? Because realistically, us going to one place for a year or Peace Corps for a couple years, like, yes, you will be helpful, but it's more about how will it grow you so that you can be even more helpful in your career down the road. And what it came down to for me was that Mercy Works was a community-based program. So I had 12 roommates, which was a lot of people. And we still text on a daily basis, and I'll get to that later. But that's a large part of what it came down to for me. And the faith-based aspect as well. I wanted that to be part of how I discerned, even after my service year, like my career trajectory, because I didn't know what I wanted to be. I was a philosophy major that could do anything. So I didn't have, I wasn't pre-med and knew I wanted to go to med school or anything. So that's kind of how I based it on. That's probably a very like philosophy kind of an answer. But I think my advice for the discernment process is asking a lot of people, attending things like this, hearing about what the actual year is like, and then reflecting by yourself. Because I remember like asking so many people, like, what should I do? What did you do? How do I do it? How do I decide? And it's really, you have to go internal on it. So spend some time in solitude and in silence for a while to get to that place for yourself. So that's what I did, and that was very, very helpful.
Yeah, so I think I was maybe coming from a little bit of a different place. I knew pretty early on that med school was something that I was interested in. And I knew that I wanted to take a gap year going into senior year. And so I started kind of just applying to a variety of different things, from obviously service, but like some research stuff, like jobs in industry, things like that. And I was just kind of hoping that something would stick. I kind of just like applied to everything and tried to figure out, kind of as I was going. But I started talking to people, particularly like in, the service realm and with Secours specifically. And I think just everyone was a lot more passionate about what they were interested in, and about their service time. And then so I started to think a little bit more about like what I wanted to get out of my gap year. And there were certain things that I think I really needed to get and wanted to get that a service year kind of provided, whereas other opportunities may not have. In particular, I think like in college, I was someone who, like, similar to like my application kind of thought, like I would throw myself at everything and kind of just like figure out what I enjoyed by doing it, and then, hopefully liking it. And it was great. And I really enjoyed doing that. But in college, you have like so many options, and it can be, pretty overwhelming after a while. And so I think I needed something to kind of like quiet my spirit in a way. And I wanted something where, you know, there was an opportunity for like reflecting on the things that I was doing, touching people in like a healthcare setting as well, because I knew that that was something that I was interested in. And, you know, in starting to think about those things and some other like aspects of personal growth, it kind of just became like Bon Secours just kind of felt right to me. And so after a while, I kind of sold myself on that. But it was a long like search, and it took me kind of like right down to the last minute, and I'm glad I made the choice that I did.
So when I was a senior in college, I knew that I wanted to go abroad after graduating. And so I applied to like a bunch of different opportunities. I applied for Fulbright, I applied to teach in Spain, and I applied for Peace Corps. And actually teaching in Spain came through first. And so that's what I did before Peace Corps. But I guess I knew I wanted to go abroad because I had studied sociology and really like valued the opportunity to learn another culture and another language in a deep, immersive way. And some of the pieces of advice that I found most helpful when I was trying to figure out what to do is being reminded by my mentors that you will have choices. I think before you know what those choices are, it's pretty scary. And I also, when I was in Spain trying to figure out like, okay, wow, am I going to spend 2 more years abroad? That's a long time. Reconnected with mentors, and they helped keep in perspective that like, you know, 2 years, it is a long time abroad, but like ultimately when you come back to the US, like most everybody's doing the same things that they were doing when you left, and you have changed in really substantial ways. And also I think one thing that helped me kind of discern like to do Peace Corps was the realization that it kind of means something specific to future employers. Like Peace Corps kind of means like it kind of registers to people as meaning a certain thing in a way that other programs abroad don't necessarily do so. So yeah, I'll stop there. Right? I'll try and keep my answer short.
I should mention that Felicia and I are happy to meet with you. We do not have Kleenex in our offices, but since we're not meeting in our offices, we're only doing virtual. You can cry in the comfort of your own home if you need to. So, okay. So how about we talk about what the work looked like? What did sort of daily life at your job site look like? What were some of the skills that you gained? How did you continue to grow in your education in terms of the actual work?
Real quick, one thing Becca mentioned reminded me something that I learned over my service year as well, is that you can't make the wrong decision. The decision you make is the right one for then. And if it doesn't go how you expect, that's okay. You can make the next decision. So you can't make a wrong decision here, especially when it comes to service years. But so at Mercy Home, I was an aftercare care manager. So I had like a caseload, we called it a care load, of former residents that I would touch base with. So with Mercy Works, which speaking of, I don't know if they're doing a program next year. Mike and Felicia, you might know, because of COVID, they didn't have one this year. But I chose this specific role because it was so broad. I could have worked in the actual homes where the youth were living, but I chose to work with former youth because I'd be able to get a more typical social work experience, because I was discerning social work for my later career as well. So I did that. I was able to work with people, and it was a vast array of life situations of people who left Mercy Home as residents. So I worked with several young moms, high schoolers, people in their 30s. So it was a really wide variety, which I really liked, because I knew the year was going to be even more discernment. So I liked how broad it was. So that helped me figure out the population I wanted to work with. And then because I lived in community, and it's a pretty well-established program, it's very intentional throughout the year. We had different like retreats, quarterly retreats, and we would have to do some readings and stuff like before each of those retreats. So it was really planned out for reflection and for discernment and for like kind of like Christian said, like being able to reflect on what I was doing in the day-to-day work. So I really loved that aspect of the program. Again, really helpful for me to process all of this new stuff I was learning. So with that though, we had a lot of training. So I attended an anti-racism training, which really informed how I was doing my work and how I live as a white person in America, you know, still to today. So there was a ton of stuff from just my program, but also Mercy Home was really passionate about growing their employees too. So I went to a lot of trainings, like a lot. I was also able to have several mentors. So I was able to just like kind of have, it was almost like an informational interview kind of a thing to be like, okay, how did you end up in your role? Your role seems like something I might like. How'd you get there? Kind of like how Notre Dame is too. You can just ask professors, how'd you end up here? So I did a lot of that. And did I cover everything kind of vaguely? And professional skills, I mean, it was a lot of social work. So that was something I was discerning if I want to go into that. And I had supervision to reflect on that with my boss. So professional skills, I mean, just being in a professional workplace too. I hadn't had a ton of experience with that too. So I could go on and on about the job specifically, but that's good for now.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned briefly a little bit what I did, but like I said, I worked as a patient advocate. And so my main role, like I think I had mentioned, was just to kind of like talk with patients. And so in the morning, I would like check the census for the day. And then I'd go in and I'd kind of just round on every patient and just see how they were doing. And oftentimes that would kind of open a door to like a deeper conversation. And I got to have some like really, really cool conversations with patients and get to know some patients really well, which was awesome. It was a really great opportunity. And being in the hospital, you see, you know, patients coming in and out, and then you'll see patients, the same patients over time. And those were some of the patients who I had like the greatest interactions with and who I got the closest with. And so that was kind of like the baseline level of my job. But on top of that, like I kind of had the opportunity to do whatever I wanted and kind of be involved in whatever I wanted. So I was on our hospital's ethics committee. I worked with our trauma-informed care team. I had to like give a presentation to the board once, and those were all things that like I, you know, enjoyed doing and like kind of actively chose to be a part of. And so having that kind of like autonomy in my role was really cool. Clara mentioned a lot of like the reflection pieces. So we also have like retreats that we would go on. We had like spiritual guidance. We would have someone who was trained in spiritual guidance and come talk to us and kind of lead us through like spiritual reflection. And then each week we would have like time set aside within that week to kind of just meet one-on-one with some of the higher ups in the program, just to kind of reflect on what we've seen so far and things like that. And that was something that I was really looking for, and having that ability to kind of like process the events that happened throughout the day, both like with my community and then kind of with other kind of like outside sources as well, was like a really valuable experience that I've kind of carried on throughout. But that's kind of the major aspects of it, I think. But happy to talk more about it if people have more questions.
So as an environmental conservation volunteer in Peace Corps, I had 3 months training at the beginning for like language, cultural, and technical training. And then I spent 2 years in a rural Paraguayan community, and they had solicited a volunteer to work with it was a group of high schoolers that had created an environmental club. So like the texture of my work was actually accompanying this group of high schoolers in doing projects like building a bird observatory and planting native trees and making community gardens. And I also taught classes to the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders about like environmental type topics. And the Peace Corps it's like 3 goals, impart technical skills, learn from another culture, and then share US culture. And so like 2 of those goals are cultural exchange. And so like a lot of the actual experience wasn't so much of like doing like productive work as we would define it as like US Americans, but really just like being present with people and being like myself very changed by that. I feel like through the experience, I reflected a lot on what it means to do service in a non-extractive way. And I think Peace Corps, compared to a lot of like international nonprofit organizations, does a pretty decent job of setting up volunteers to do like non-extractive work, because of the amount of time that you spend in a community, and then the orientation towards starting as a basis with what the community themselves identify as their own needs and their own like priority projects. And that for me translated into, using some of my skills that I'd learned in an undergrad of like doing a community needs assessment. I kind of, talked a lot about that in my grad school application. And also I really improved my Spanish and learned intermediate Guarani. So those are kind of some of the like hard skills that I name coming out of Peace Corps.
I think one of the myths that we often at the center need to debunk or deconstruct is the idea that volunteer service work is like volunteer type position, sort of this, these small odd jobs around the office to help out, but couldn't be clearer that as the panelists just shared, it's professional work, absolutely professional work. And so to think about the kind of skills that one has or one wants to grow professionally, to think about the issues that one's passionate about, the populations one is drawn to, these are all really, I think, helpful pieces as one thinks about that next step. In addition to the work, I think community life is really important to think through in making these decisions. And so there are, of course, faith-based programs, which Clara and Christian did, and then non-faith-based programs like Peace Corps and other AmeriCorps programs. And those are distinct, but also within the faith-based programs, there are many different versions of intentional community. And so people like Felicia and I can help you think through that. But I wonder if the panelists could now speak a little bit to community life. So you may be working 40 plus hours a week, and that means you have a lot of time with community and outside of work. And so wondering if you could share a little bit about what your community looked like. What were maybe some of the real joys, maybe some of the challenges, some of the relationships, if you could describe that a little bit in detail.
So like I said, Mercy Works is a community-based service program, and we actually lived on site. So that is another thing to discern if you want to live where you work, because it's a great thing and a really hard thing. It's a yes and kind of a thing. So I lived at Mercy Homes campus with 12 roommates who were all also 22. And I had lived off campus before and then moved pretty much back into a dorm. So that was definitely a tough transition. But I think the work I did was so helpful in like figuring out what I want to do professionally. And then community has just completely changed the way I view my relationships and how I want to be in relationship moving forward. It is because it is so hard. So I'm not going to like sugarcoat community as this like, oh, we sang every evening and it was, wonderful. It is super hard work. And thankfully I grew up with 3 sisters, so I've lived in community before. But it is really tough. I don't even want to say but, and it has made me just a better person, if I can say that about myself. We met every Wednesday. We had to be together. That sounds bad, but we would share a meal. We would break bread together. cooked by a group of us, and then we would have something put together by our director. So sometimes that would be speakers, sometimes we would go out into the community to learn more about Chicago. Sometimes we went like a variety of things, which was really wonderful. But we also had did a lot of like personal growth in community. So we did our Enneagram together. We did our conflict styles together. We did our like work types together, like a ton of different kind of personality things. So then we could interact with each other on that level, which has been really helpful now. And after Mercy Works, I moved home to Sioux City to my parents' house. And my mom, a couple months in, was like, wow, the way you brought that conflict to me is so different than how you used to do that. And so even she, as like an outsider, was able to see the growth in how I approach issues with the people I love and the way I advocate for myself too. So community life was really hard and I had a lot of conflict, but we're human. And so that's what happens. But the work was also really hard because I hadn't done it before, and social work is really difficult. You're seeing some of the worst things of humanity are coming to you, and some of the best things. So having community to go home to every evening was really, really helpful in processing all of that. And I could go on and on about my community. Again, we still text every day. They all came to my wedding. I mean, we're with each other even still while we're far apart.
Yeah, I think I like pretty much have to echo everything that Clara said. So similar to what she was saying, we don't live directly on site, but we live like maybe 2 or 3 blocks from the hospital. And there's another community down in Richmond, Virginia, and they're the same way. And just to speak on that briefly, that is also very hard, but that was one of the most formative experiences that I've had. There's a certain I think agency that you develop when you live in the area of the people that you're serving with, to be able to say to be able to just kind of relate to them on that next level. I think, in my service endeavors in college, that was something that I didn't quite get. And so that was something that I was looking for in a service here. And it helped me, relate to patients and just kind of understand a lot of the challenges that come with living in that area, but also a lot of the really, really great aspects of that as well. My in-house community, I lived with 4 other people, and they are also 4 of my best friends now. And it was a really, really great time living with them and just having the opportunity to kind of share an experience. Similar to what Clara was saying, we had time that was kind of set aside to just kind of be with each other, and be idle with each other, which I think is different. And there's a lot of vulnerability that comes out of that, that I think is really cool and kind of helped develop our relationships with each other. So we would have dinner every night together. There were some exceptions, but we tried to have dinner every night. And that was partially in the beginning kind of encouraged by the program, but then we decided that was just something that we wanted to do because we really valued that time being with each other. And then we also had spaces to reflect on not only our work, but community life. So what was working well within our community, what were things that people needed in the community, and then just personal struggles that people were going through. And just being able to be that vulnerable with a group of people is, I think, extremely unique, and something that even with my best friends from high school and college, not a level that I've ever really been able to achieve. And so if nothing else, that experience alone was worth doing a service here for, because you just get to know someone, get to know a group of people in such a really different and impactful way. And to be honest, this was the community life was not something that was a huge selling point for me early on. I was, I think, more excited about living in Baltimore and the work that I was doing. But coming out of it, I think that is probably my biggest takeaway from the year, and the thing that I've gained the most from.
So the community that I was a part of is a rural community in the countryside of Paraguay. There's about 400 families, and it was a dirt road when I lived there. No other English speakers. I lived with a host family for like about the first 5 months of my service, mostly for like, you know, to understand culture and learn the language a little bit better and kind of get what's going on. Then like throughout the rest of the two years, 27 months, mostly like, I guess because of the gender norms in Latin America, or in Paraguay especially, most of my friends were like either senoras, like older women, or like high school girls. And I, like when Mike sent us the question, one of the questions is like, what was the challenge of living in community? And some of this is cultural, but it was the three things that like I found most challenging living in this community was how much I needed to learn to slow down and like let go of my own US mindset of like what is productivity, and like adapt to the culture about just like if someone stops by to hang out, to like drop what I was planning to do to be present with them. The second challenge, of course, was like the machismo, like the, you know, real like male dominated culture, and like also like the gossip in a small community. I mean, like there's some like cultural things that made it kind of difficult to live there. And like honestly being homesick was pretty hard. It was difficult to miss like key events of life that were happening at home, like a wedding, you know, the death of a friend. And so like it's pretty hard, and all of those things, you know, like who did I have to turn to? It was my Paraguayan neighbors. And so that also helped with like the cultural immersion, the language learning. I also want to say, when Mike sent us the questions, one of them was, is there a particular relationship that really impacted you? And I laughed because I actually married my Paraguayan host brother. And so I kind of thought that maybe that question was like specifically directed at me. So yes, I was very, very impacted by like one particular relationship. And I bring this up also because thinking back to where I was at before I was going abroad, I was actually dating a guy in the US before I went abroad. And I want to say, if there's anyone in this group who's like in a relationship with a significant other, it's okay to like still do a year of service and be apart. And if the relationship is meant to work, it will work. And I saw relationships that were successful and made it through 2 years of being apart. And I really believe that if our relationship had been meant to work out, we would have. And so I just wanted to like give that note of encouragement too, because I think that what I saw amongst my Peace Corps colleagues is that like that was a huge reality for a lot of us, of like a love that we left behind or broke up with, or went into Peace Corps and then broke up with, you know. It's just like, it's a big part of the experience. And so I just want to acknowledge that too.
I appreciate that, Becca. That actually comes up a fair amount in conversations with students. It's a very real question, a real reality. And a year does seem like forever when you're graduating, and I think all of you can probably attest it went by like that. And so to talk to people about that situation if you find yourself in it, because the hope is that you will pursue your passions, explore your desires, and things can work out, and things can also change. And the other piece that you mentioned that I hear often is a real fear of missing out on something that will be going on back home, maybe a wedding, maybe, you know, a grandparent is old or something like that. That stuff's real too. And yet again, you know, to think through sort of what do I want for myself and my own path? What do I feel tethered to that is okay to get some distance from? And not that we have answers, but certainly to just sort of name those questions and have some conversation partners, I think is really helpful in terms of thinking that through. the last thing I'll say about community is programs look very different from each other. So I was in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and I had 7 housemates, and we all worked at different parts in the city of Cleveland. So we actually didn't see each other a ton, but it was very cool to be able to come back home and share our different work experiences with each other when we weren't ripping each other's heads off. No, I'm just kidding. Community has all sorts of great challenges that make us better people, for sure. Okay, final question before we open it up to the audience. Can we talk about how your service experience, and you've already alluded to this in a number of ways, but maybe more specifically, how your service experience shaped what was next for you in terms of your professional and personal commitments, next steps, more questions. Looking back now, what kind of impacts can you trace to the service year on your life?
So like I said, I left Notre Dame, was like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do. Was thinking law, I don't know. So I went to Mercy Home. And so, like I said, I got a really well-rounded social work kind of snapshot because Mercy Home has so many different jobs and aspects to the place itself. And I got to do a more traditional type of social work. And then was affirmed in my abilities in that. So I was told and by both like coworkers and the people I was working with, they're like, yes, this is going well. It was very affirmative. So social work definitely feels like part of who I am and kind of how I'll do things, no matter if I'm a social worker or not. But I currently work for the city of Sioux City as a street outreach coordinator. So I work with our homeless population in the community and accompanying them on their housing journey. So connecting them to resources. And a lot of my work at Mercy Home was accompaniment, and that was what we were told. Like, we can't save people, we can't make them do anything, but we can be a resource and an encouragement and a sounding block for them. So that's a lot of what I do still with a different population. And during my Mercy Works year, I worked really closely with one of my clients. Was a young woman who was actually almost the exact same age I was, and she was escaping or like leaving her human trafficker. And so again, it was a long road of accompaniment. But with that, we had a really wonderful relationship, I think. But with that, she allowed me like really into her life to see about, her healing journey. Long story short, that experience and with the other young women and young moms I worked with led me to this calling I have now that I want to be a doula. And so if you haven't heard of that, it's kind of like a midwife, but it's about accompanying women and birthing people through their birth and their birth journey. So it's supposed to be a focus for that parent while the doctors focus on the baby. So anyway, that is the population I feel called to, and that came about because of my service year. So I've gone to training and I'm hoping to launch that business eventually. But then COVID hit and I don't want to be in a hospital right now. So we'll see. But that came about with a lot of reflection and talking, and I'm so thankful for my community to be able to talk all that through, and my supervisor and spiritual director. So having, the service year as a specific year, it's just so like concentrated reflection and discernment. And then now I can kind of do it for myself. I have those like, how to think through things and that kind of stuff. So it's an ever ongoing process. And one last thing, when I left Notre Dame, it felt like, all right, I need to find my career and find my calling like now. And I shouldn't be working a job unless it's part of my calling. And that's not real. It's not life. I don't feel particularly called to working with people experiencing homelessness. I am enjoying my work, you know, in the day-to-day, but it's not the population that I like, gets me out of bed and I'm like, yes, this is what I want to do. And that's okay. It pays well, it has health insurance, and that's what I need right now. So it's okay to prioritize different things as you make different decisions. You know, and then once my husband starts working, you know, a solid job with good benefits, then I can hopefully launch into my doula practice. So it's okay to do something that's like not on your career path. And in fact, it will help you find the right one for that moment. So hope that was helpful.
Yeah, first I just wanted to briefly mention that like I was in an outside relationship during Bon Secours, and I am still in that relationship. So if that's something that people are worried about or wanted to talk about, then I'd be happy to talk about that as well. It's challenging, but you can certainly make it work. Like I had mentioned, I think I was fortunate in kind of knowing that medicine was kind of my calling, and my year at Bon Secours, if anything, just affirmed that. And so that's where I am now. Pragmatically, I think Bon Secours has had a very significant like influence on how I want to practice medicine, and in particular, like the specialty that I'm interested in, and kind of like the things outside of my specialty that I want to involve myself in. Like in particular, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do going into the year in terms of specialty. I still don't really know, but things like emergency medicine really appeal to me now. And one of the big reasons for that is just the interaction that you have with the community there. A lot of during my time at Bon Secours, a lot of the patients would come in through the emergency room. And so through working there, you kind of had a really good pulse on like the community. And I felt like I would be able to kind of serve the community that I was in better through like something like that. Personally, I think the biggest takeaway and the thing that I carry with me is kind of this idea of like living simply. That's a tenet of Bon Secours, and I used to think about it sort of as like a restrictive thing, as in like, you know, you need to restrict yourself from having these things, like buying these things, you know, doing this with your time. But my stance on that, or my thought on that, kind of evolved throughout the year, and the way I interpret it now is more as just being intentional with how you use the resources that you have, whether that be money. I think that's kind of the most tangible one, but also like time, and even just how you devote your energy. Like I had said in the beginning, I think I like to spread myself, you know, pretty thin and kind of take on whatever I can. And in being forced to kind of be idle and to kind of sit and reflect on what like the things that I enjoyed doing and what I was passionate about. In my time in medical school, I felt like I've been able to kind of like devote more fully to things that I care tremendously about. And so, you know, being able to kind of sit and evaluate periodically what you care about, why you care about it, and then how whether the energy that you're devoting lines up with how much you care about that thing, is really important and can kind of carry you through in whatever you end up doing or however you decide to end up living your life. And so, you know, I think those two big things were two of many like really great lessons that I've carried forward from my time, but two, you know, very important ones.
When I reflect on, you know, my professional trajectory and how this service fits in, it's a lot easier in hindsight to see and tell like a linear story. And it wasn't a linear story, but I guess like if I were saying it in hindsight, how it makes sense with my profession now is in my community, I was involved in helping navigate a conflict between an environmental group and a group of folks who had settled on protected land for their livelihood, but there was some like real conflict there. And out of that, I, you know, went on to pursue peace studies in the Masters of International Peace Studies at Notre Dame. And from there, went on to study in work in Colombia, where they were having a peace agreement to end armed conflict, and did research on that peace process for many years before coming into my current job of working with graduate students in the master's program. So that's how I, kind of like see those things like building one on the other. But I also want to share that like in that story, there's like big gaps of time that I like wasn't doing like really that productive or interesting things. Right after I graduated from college, I was actually a nanny for a couple years, or for a couple months, excuse me. And so I want to like reassure you that if the thing that you do right after college isn't like your dream thing, that's okay, and it won't define the rest of your life. And also, there was seasons, 6 months where I, worked as a secretary at my old university because I like needed a job, and so like just understand that like your path will be winding, and that's okay. And kind of going back to like the points Mike was making after our last round of comments, I really do think that at the stage of life that you are all in, it's just really important to know that like this is the time of your life when it's going to be the most easy for you to do something kind of radical. If you're going to do something a little like extreme, like whether it's moving abroad or like living in voluntary poverty, or going to a place where you don't know anybody and living with 12 strangers. I mean, when you're 21 or 2, like that's the time of your life when it's like kind of easiest to take that risk, the calculated risk. And I also want to say, like, I've lived abroad in quite a few countries, and every time before I leave, I always have this feeling of like, what the hell am I getting myself into? And so like looking back in life, all of the most important and meaningful things that I've done, I had that feeling right before I did it. And so like, that's actually kind of good, like to put yourself in things that are kind of scary and really stretch you.
Thank you. I was a bartender after my JVC experience for a couple of years, and that was a really fruitful time in my life. And there's also stories of people, our Peace Corps recruiter used to tell a story of two college students who were roommates. One went off to the Peace Corps, the other went off to work at Deloitte. And then 3 years later, the Peace Corps volunteer returned to the States, got a job at Deloitte, was the manager of his college roommate. And you say, well, but the other guy had 3 years of experience at the company. Yeah, well, his roommate learned any number of amazing skills overseas, was put in all sorts of situations where he really grew into sort of manager material, came back and was hired to manage his buddy. We've got a few minutes left. I want to open it up to the audience for questions. You could ask a specific panelist, you could ask all three, and maybe to get to a few questions, we could, again, keep our answers short. And as has been alluded to, the panelists would be happy to follow up if we want to continue the conversation offline in the weeks ahead. So, but right now, I'd love to open it up to students for any questions.
Hi, I have a question. My name is Leanne Williams, and I'm a senior majoring in Spanish and music with minors in sociology and Catholic social tradition. So one of my questions was I don't know if any of y'all were deciding, but how would you decide between working in nonprofit versus working in service, where some of the things are like very similar opportunities?
Do you mean like taking a job at a nonprofit versus doing like volunteer service?
Yes, yes.
What was, oh, okay, I'll try and make it quick. What was helpful for me was the intentionality around a service year. And for me too, when I was a senior, it was like an easier bite to take instead of like jumping into like a job that to me, senior year, that felt like, oh my gosh, I could be there forever. What if I'm there forever and then nothing changes? And that's, of course, ridiculous. But it was easier for me as a senior making that decision to do the service year. And I think almost every service year, like, is extra intentional because they know it's only 1 year. So, like, you know, there's going to be certain things you're going to, like, get out of it. So you'll probably be working at a nonprofit. And if you live in community, you get all of that. If you're, you know, even if you're not, it's still one concentrated year. So it was easier for me to make that decision because I knew it was 1 year too.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. I think the biggest thing for me is just kind of just like that reflection piece and like the community side of things. That's not necessarily, I mean, I admittedly, we're all biased. We did a service year, and at least I didn't ever really work at a nonprofit besides through my service year. But I think, like, you know, part of the experience of doing a service year is kind of the ancillary pieces around the actual work that you do. And so being able to engage, if those are things that like excite you or that you think you'll be able to grow from, particularly like living in solidarity with other people and then like actively processing the work that you do, then, you know, that would be a good reason to do a service year. That's not what everyone's seeking. You know, a lot of people are really excited to enter the workforce or have a really specific vision for a population that they want to serve. And if, you know, that's something that you think applies to you, then definitely seek out like working for that specific nonprofit or whatever it may be. But, you know, those are just some things to consider as well.
Also, real quick, a lot of people end up working at the nonprofit they serve in during their service year. My sister's an example. She did AmeriCorps for the city of South Bend and worked there for like 4 years after. So, and that's not a nonprofit, but a lot of people do that. So it segues into a job with that placement very often.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of add that the service year, things are set up for you in terms of housing and community and transportation and all those things. So it actually could come down to some pretty practical questions about finances, depending on the cost of living in the city where you might be looking, in addition to all the ancillary things, as Christian put it. How about another question? And you can ask a question too, Felicia, if you'd like. Can I ask the audience, where do you find yourselves? Are you, so Leanne mentioned sort of looking at nonprofit versus a service year. Others, are you looking at things in particular, or do you have just sort of broad questions at the moment, or be interesting to maybe hear what some folks are thinking about real quickly?
I'm not really sure what I'm doing next. I'm hoping to do something kind of in data, and I'm kind of wondering if there's a kind of postgraduate service opportunity where I could do something in data or in the technical side of things or in like business side of things. Because a lot of it seems to be like very service focused, like in like the volunteer side of service. And you kind of said it wasn't because you're actually doing professional work, but it still seems to be that kind of service professional jobs. And I'm wondering if there's anything like in the business side or technical side.
I have a friend from my hometown that didn't do data, but worked in the U.S. Attorney's office. And I'm pretty sure he just did the clerical work. Like, he wasn't a lawyer, obviously. So I know that it's out there. So that was an AmeriCorps position. And then some AmeriCorps jobs are related to community living. So if you're trying to find like the data and community living, it's got to be out there. But AmeriCorps is where I would start, because I mentioned my sister too. She worked for the city of South Bend and did a ton of she worked in code enforcement, I think, and they were like revamping everything in the city from paper to computers. So like, honestly, maybe even the city of South Bend might still need someone to help them do that. So it's out there. I would start with AmeriCorps, but there's probably other.
Felicia, do you want to say anything about Catholic Volunteer Network and the many kinds of job areas?
Yeah, CatholicVolunteerNetwork.org is a fantastic clearinghouse where they just kind of have they act as a resource for all these different organizations across the world. So if you go onto their website, you can create a profile where you can list the things you're interested in. So if it's like technology related types of activities, you can just put that in there, and then also say like, and I want to live in a city, or I want to live on the East Coast, I want to be in community, or, you know, you can really tailor it to your interests, and they'll try and match you with different types of organizations that exist. So they're not all Catholic, but they do have a lot of faith-based organizations. But in addition to that, I would say, you know, as Clara mentioned, AmeriCorps is another great resource. And I guess just one other thought on that is that to know that these interview processes are not cutthroat. You know, the interview process with service organizations is truly one of discernment. You know, like you go out there and you like find maybe 10 or 12 different organizations that look like they could be a good match. And then as you do that interior work that Clara talked about, and you try and figure out which ones are a really good match for you that will stretch you and help you to grow in the ways you're looking, apply to 4 or 5, and there's really a great discernment process that happens with the organization. It's not stressful. It's hopefully a fruitful experience. So try to not hype up too much like the process of applying.
Josie, I just jumped on and clicked on data entry, which is one of the job areas, and there were something like 20 programs that were yielded in the search on the Catholic Volunteer Network link that Felicia mentioned and I put in the chat. And yeah, don't be fooled by the name. So Catholic, not Catholic, you know, there's a wide variety of what those intentional communities look like. And we can help you think through that. So any final burning questions as we approach 8 o'clock? Maybe I'll, so I want to thank our 3 panelists, Clara, Christian, and Becca, and thanks Felicia for being a huge support in this. And maybe I'll let the panelists say one final word as we send all the students back into winter break and the great space of thinking about what your life is asking of you.
Go do something radical.
Again, you can't make the wrong choice. So just make one and sit with it, and it's right. It's right for you.
Yeah, just enjoy your senior year, and yeah, you're at a really great time in your life. So definitely take advantage of it.
So much wisdom. You guys are fantastic. Thank you, Becca, Clara, and Christian for being with us and sharing all of your life experiences thus far. It's really wonderful to hear, and I think our students have enjoyed it.
And thanks to the students for participating. Know that we're around. Know that the panelists have put some contact information. Please seek them out if a conversation would be helpful. And then Felicia and I are always just an email and a virtual square away. So thanks to you all. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Stay
Mike
safe
and
and healthy.
Felicia.
Thanks so much. Good night,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Good night.
Hey, Clara, the doula saved our lives. My wife and I, we had twins in April.
Well, and I just heard Felicia mentioned, congrats, that's so wonderful.
Thank you. I mean, we refer to her as the baby whisperer. I mean, she was great.
Such a